So this week, obviously last week we were talking a little bit about teacher development. We do have a little bit to finish off this week, but the majority of this week we are kind of moving into the first part of shifting from not just yoga teachers, because there's so much as a yoga teacher, but we're really moving into the business side of things because there is so much to discuss here. And we're really beginning to create the foundations for this. So hopefully what this is going to feel like is a real anchor to everything we're doing. And it's then going to really build as we move through the next 8 weeks after this, which is fantastic. So beginning with our last little bit of teacher development. Obviously last week we spoke a lot about finding your voice, and I really hope that that was helpful, whether it be a refresh or whether it be new things that you've heard. Hopefully that's helped you to really anchor in, okay, yeah, this is the kind of teacher I want to be. And that really helps you coming into this week. Now, a few things that I did want to touch on that I feel we began to touch on last week when we were talking about really beginning to deepen your teaching is we were talking about being authentic in your voice. And now that I think that you've taken time to think about, okay, what is my voice? Maybe you've done that activity of speaking to family members or people who you've taught and asking them what are sort of the qualities you think of when you think of me, or whatever that might be. You may have also been to other teachers. Did anyone get a chance to go to a class or see another teacher teach, and whether that be good or bad? Um, Either way, they're both really, really useful. And that no teacher is bad either, but whether it not be reflecting what you wanted it to reflect or what you wanted to see, it's also really good to get that feeling of, oh, that class felt a little bit more empty than a class like this, and things like that, right? Now, that's where this authenticity thing comes in because, okay, we've seen maybe a teacher not feeling super authentic, or maybe we've seen a teacher feeling really authentic, and we're like, how do I get that? How am I achieving that in my teaching? And this is where we really need to find the balance between authenticity and vulnerability, because our job as a teacher isn't necessarily to be vulnerable in front of our students. And I mean that in the sense of our job as the teacher is to hold space, right? That is what we're doing. We're keeping everyone safe. We're helping people to feel as if they have a safe space, if they are working through something or if they are just coming to their practice. We want to be holding a really safe and almost stable, grounded space for our students. So, with that, that's where vulnerability sometimes doesn't necessarily help us as a teacher. And the reason I mention it now is because also doesn't always help us in our marketing. Okay. And we're not talking strictly about marketing today, but we are going to speak about kind of the beginnings of how that starts, right? So, what I mean by authenticity versus vulnerability is we are usually teaching from something we have learned. There is no pressure for you to teach through something you are currently going through. That's the easiest way to put it, right? When you are moving through lessons, which you will continue to do as a teacher, but also just as a person, when you are moving through life's lessons and the ups and downs, there is no pressure for you to be like, I need to be sharing this with my students right now. I can share this in a month's time, right? And really giving yourself the respect, you are still allowed to have the time and space to move through what you're moving through, right? And this is where occasionally I see maybe some yoga teachers getting not necessarily burnt out, but feeling as if they're feeling a little bit drained because if there's this pressure of I need to be confident being vulnerable, or I need to be able to share all of these things in this moment and be really honest and be really upfront, you are going to feel drained because that's a lot of pressure. Not only do I need to teach a class, but I also need to kind of let people into my life a little bit, and you absolutely don't. And for some of you this will be really obvious, but I know when we first start going with authenticity, we're like, oh, where is the line? This is the line. Okay, so the line is, I don't need to be vulnerable, I don't need to share the ins and outs of things, but when I am sharing authentic lessons, I'm sharing the themes. It's not really about your position in the theme when you are teaching. Does that make sense? So for example, if I've moved through something and I want to be a really authentic teacher, so I do want to share this at some point. I moved through surrender, for example, and it was really hard. It was really horrible. Hannah was there when I was going through some of this, actually. We were pulling cards together around it. And it was really challenging, right? But when I come to then teach that, I'm teaching it from a space of here's what I learned. Here is how you can benefit from this theme, because I'm actually here to serve them. If it's helping me too, that's great. That's how we want it and fills everyone's cup. But there's no pressure to find that sort of deep vulnerability. There's so much respect for you still having your process, and I think that does sometimes go without saying, but just full permission here. The next little bit that I wanted to just mention, and it should have been mentioned last week, but I just forgot, is our job as yoga teachers, which we did speak about, is we're not really here to motivate. And this is important again, actually, this week when we think about your yoga classes, your core values, sorry. Now, this is where we see the difference between yoga teachers and Pilates teachers, yoga teachers and gym instructors, bar, whatever it might be. This is the difference between us and those certifications, which are also great. There's nothing wrong with them. Now, our job as a yoga teacher actually isn't to motivate. And the reason for that is if we look at the yamas and niyamas, which we may have forgotten, but think back to your yoga teacher training when you was talking about the yamas and niyamas. Good idea to refresh them as well, because when we talk about the foundations of business, they're great to bring back in if we want a really yogic business. But as I said, with the yamas and niyamas, one of them is tapas, right? Now, tapas is discipline. Tapas is self-determination. This is something we need when we're working, but it's also something our students should be aiming to create. So why I say this is as not a warning, but as a little like signpost to if you are motivating your students and saying, come on, you can do this, like you can do it, push a little harder, keep going. If we're, and there's a line with it, encouragement is good, but pushing and really being that sort of teacher, like push, push, push. Or maybe people don't want to do headstands and you're like, everyone up in a headstand. I've been in classes like that, right? Where there's that push from the teacher, which isn't a bad thing, but it's not actually teaching yoga. And the reason that I say this is that the aim is that the students have the yamas and niyamas before they actually get on a yoga mat. Those are the first two sort of steps in the 8-limb path. They should have those yamas and niyamas before they step on the mat. If they don't, we are then creating tapas, for example. We are creating their motivation. What we are actually removing from them is the opportunity to build self-determination and discipline, because they will constantly rely on us as a teacher to create that for them. Does that make sense? So then they won't want to go home and practice their headstands because they're like, well, I can only do that when the teacher holds my legs, right? And we've probably seen this many times. I know that I've been to classes with people who have then been like, oh yeah, I'm never going to do that at home because the teacher did it for them. And this is a really hard thing because we want to help our students and we want to be there for our students and we want to help them see that they're capable of more. But also it's not our responsibility to push them because we're removing an opportunity for them to practice yoga more deeply. Does that make sense? So your job as a teacher, and this is again important when we think about core values, your job is not to motivate, it's to inspire, right? So the way in which we encourage our students to take their practice deeper is seeing how embodied we are in our practice, right? Or seeing how maybe you've broken down the entry to a pose and it now feels more achievable for them. That can be inspiring. They're like, oh, I didn't know I could do that. But now that she's broken it down into 10 steps, I'm like, yeah, I think I can do this now, right? So this is where your job as a teacher kind of comes in. And that if you haven't sort of heard that before, it is really important because again, we spoke about last week between good teachers and great teachers. A great teacher is helping their students embody yoga more deeply. Yoga is not just what we're doing on a mat in a 60-minute studio class. Yoga is all of the lessons we're taking off, and students will feel that. I'm sure every single one of you has probably been to a yoga class that felt like a workout class. Yeah, there's nothing wrong with it, but it's not getting the depth that think of the teachers you've been to where you've gone, oh my God, that class was life-changing. They're two completely different classes, right? And this is where we see the classes that feel more workouty, and this is where we see the classes that are life-changing. There's worlds apart between them, and I want you to be on the side where if you want to create really life-changing classes or really impactful and authentic classes, you can, and you have the tools to create those. It's also going to build your confidence, right? If someone asks why, you're like, I know exactly why I do it this way. Yeah. And that's a real big sort of confidence builder, especially for newer teachers or teachers sort of finding their feet within this sort of world of yoga. Now, the last thing that I wanted to say, and this is going to make a bit more sense in upcoming weeks, but I want to put it here now because if any of you are already teaching a little bit, this is something you can again practice. Your job as the teacher is to be, and this is where we talk a little bit about yin and yang energies. So if you haven't heard yin and yang energies or Shiva Shakti energy, I'm going to do a very, very, very whistle stop tour, but we are going to come back to this in an entire week. So this is like your little taste. So if we think of yang energy is strong. It's a little bit more masculine. It's a little bit more fiery. This energy is holding things, right? Yin energy, a little bit more soft, a little bit more relaxed, more surrendered, right? Now, your job as the space holder of the teacher is you are actually meant to be the most yang energy in the room. And what I mean by that is, and this we spoke about a little bit last week when we spoke about energy and the law of entrainment. This is kind of just another way of thinking of it. You are holding space for everyone. You are keeping everyone safe. And our jobs is to actually hold a safe enough space that people can then soften into what's known as their more yin energy. They can surrender. They can trust that you're looking after them. They feel really safe in your hands. And think about if you've ever been to a class with a person or with a teacher and you're like, yeah, I really trust them. Like if they're going to ask me to try a pose, I trust that they see that I'm capable, right? And I guarantee if you've been to enough class, you've also probably been to a class on the other side where you're like, I'm not sure they know my limits. Do you get me? And this is where the difference is of we really want to be that safe space because we're not going to get the best out of our students if we are not creating that really sort of grounded, stable, safe place. And I'm going to show you how to do that this week. Core values are actually a big part of this. So these are all things that we can sort of just begin to keep in the back of our mind when we're thinking about my teaching. And this might sound like a lot to begin with. It might be like, oh my gosh, there's so many things I need to put in place. Jot them down, refer back to them, right? We're going to end, well, towards the end of this session, we're going to do a bit of a teaching audit or like a looking at your teaching. So that can sort of come back in and you can refer back to these points we've made at the beginning and think, where can I fit that in? Where can I adjust things to fit exactly what I want and make everything really intentional? Does that make sense? Yeah, are we happy with that? Are there any questions? All good? Perfect. Okay, with that being said, now we can jump straight into core values. And what do I mean by core values? Now, core values are basically what your values are as a teacher, but because we are not just talking about teaching, we're talking about also beginning to build your career and your business as yoga teachers, and we're going to circle back to that in a moment. But the reason they are really important is because this is where we begin to find our feet. These are not only the foundations of your teaching, they are the foundations of your business as well. They create sort of the parameters, the anchor to everything that you do. And when you know them, you again are going to be so much more confident. You're going to feel so much more empowered because you know exactly why you're doing certain things. And the most powerful thing that we know, we spoke about this again last week, is intention, right? First of all, with intention, you feel like you know your direction. Energy goes where intention, well, energy flows where intention goes, right? So we know that this is really, really important. It's really going to help. So the importance of core values to begin with is it's going to create your teacher identity, which we were talking about last week. How do I know what my voice is? This is why I said take some time over the next week to find it, because this is where we're anchoring it down into your core values. But it's also creating your brand identity, right? And as we begin to create a business out of yoga, our brand identity is quite important. Like we're beginning to create something that's a real anchor for us, okay? So first things first, it's helping to create your identity, and it will do. It also really helps you to sink into this, so you are not everyone's teacher. And I mentioned this last week, but I will mention it again. You are not everyone's teacher. I am not everyone's teacher. No one is everyone's teacher, right? You might even think someone is, they're not. I guarantee you they are not everyone's teacher. And this is a good thing. You do not want to be everyone's teacher. What you want, and if you're trying to be everyone's teacher, you're just going to be okay. Yeah, she's all right. Yeah, their classes are okay, nothing special. Whereas what we actually want is to be speaking so directly to a certain student that they walk out of the class and go, oh my goodness, I loved that. Because those, as I said, are the students that are coming on retreats with you, that are joining your community, that are finding your classes elsewhere and things like this. These are what we're really trying to create. And this is where you really sinking into, I am not everyone's teacher and I don't need to please everyone, right? And that's a hard thing at first because you're like, I need to be able to do everything. right? I need to be everyone's teacher. I need to be able to do everything, so then everyone will like me. It's not really how it works. That's where the market's a bit saturated if we're trying to please everyone, because you can't, right? And this is where the importance of considering yourself a slightly more specialist teacher can be really helpful. And this is where the core values, again, are really going to help. They're really great. But it's something I want you to kind of think about now. And we did speak about it a little bit last week. When we think about becoming more of a specialist teacher, what I mean by that is we don't want a jack of all trades, master of none situation here. You don't need to teach every style of yoga to be a good teacher. In fact, think about who you'd rather go to. I always use the example of getting your hair done, because you're usually quite particular about your hair done, or some people are, especially if they're getting the color done. Do you want to go to a hairstylist who just does everything? Or do you want to go to someone who specifically specializes in exactly what you want, whether it be a specific style of haircut or a specific color that you like? Like, you want to go to the person who specializes on it. The blonde specialist doesn't get many brunettes, but they still have a full timetable because people want exactly what they want to do. Does that make sense? And we can do the same thing as yoga teachers. And that's, again, where we combat this idea of it being a saturated market. It's not, but we have to speak to our students rather than trying to speak to everyone, because our voice just gets swallowed if that's the case. Our message, what we're trying to share, just gets caught up in the noise of what everyone's doing if we're not specific on what we have to share. And what I mean by becoming a specialist teacher is I usually encourage you to, again, your core value is going to help, but narrow down the styles you love teaching. I tend to find this more so with the teachers who teach like Hatha and Vinyasa, or Vinyasa and Ashtanga and things like this. And they teach two styles that are really similar, but usually they prefer one a little bit more. Usually the other one's just there because they feel like they should, right? So for some of you may be so clear. I know when I finished my yoga teacher training, I was pretty clear. I knew I wanted to be a Vinyasa teacher, but for you guys, you may have a few that are a bit more similar. That doesn't mean you can't teach it. Doesn't mean you can't teach restorative. It doesn't mean you can't teach yoga stretch. But what I mean is in the sense of you want to be teaching classes that you enjoy, first of all. But second of all, you want to be teaching classes that fit into your values as a teacher. So there might be some styles that don't really fit into your style as a teacher, if that makes sense. So for example, my training was Ashtanga Vinyasa. Ashtanga didn't really fit into my style as a teacher, so I don't teach it, right? So this is where you might want to really just think, okay, what fits in to what I want to share? And this will be different for every single one of you. So for example, I'm going to use like a case study of a teacher. Say there is a teacher who did their Ashtanga training. Maybe it's an Ashtanga Vinyasa training. They love the more Ashtanga side of things. And they are still thinking, oh, I want to teach more than one style. Now, for that teacher, I don't know the teacher, but let's say this is the teacher we have. They're very strength focused. They're very focused on maybe a lot of inversion work and things like this. Does that teacher feel right teaching a yin class? Or are they doing it because they feel like they should? Do you want to go to that teacher teaching a yin class? You're probably a bit like, oh, I don't know what to expect. That's not what we want. We don't want this feeling of students not knowing what to expect, right? Now, take this teacher and say they go and do a rocket yoga training and they start teaching rocket yoga classes. Immediately, you're like, yeah, I can see that from them. Like, yeah, I can see what I expect from them. If you haven't experienced rocket yoga before, it's like vinyasa, but lots of inversion play, lots of arm balances, quite fast paced. So it's quite a dynamic vinyasa style. So we can immediately see how that suits their style and their way of teaching more than something else. Does that make sense? And we're going to do this in a moment and give you a moment to really think, okay, what fits in? But core values will help. But what I mean by that is that we do not want to create that feeling of uncertainty in our students, right? We don't want that feeling of like, oh, they're teaching a yin class. I'm not sure what to expect. And sometimes it can work. Sometimes it absolutely can. But we want to avoid that as much as we physically can, right? And there are some teachers that can do it so well. Hannah Nitai does this really well. Yeah, like that's a teacher that I know you've practiced with. But there are some teachers who do this really well, but you can actually see their essence in their other classes, how they do it. And the core values are still very much there. You can see that communicated through both styles he teaches, right? It really does share, but that's the importance of this. Not only that, it also helps you create connections with your students because they will begin to resonate with your core values. It creates consistency, reliability, predictability, which helps students feel safe because they know what to expect. And when you think about actually any type of class, studio classes probably more so, but any type of class, people are spending their money on coming to your class. And I know for me, I'm far less likely to spend my money if I don't know what I'm getting. I would much rather be less experimentative with my teachers because I want to know what I'm getting. So, for example, I expect to go to a class and get a pretty similar thing every time if I'm paying to go to a class. If you think about your favorite teacher, if you walked in one day and they just changed everything, you'd be like, I love you, but what are you doing? Like, you're my favorite teacher, but this is not what I expected today, right? Because you want to feel like you know what you're coming for. And it's also just going to really build your confidence in your teaching. So, with that being said, let's talk about discovering your core values and begin to iron out some core values for each of you today. Now, usually when I talk about core values, I encourage you to have roughly 3 or 4 core values. And what these are sort of words that really anchor your style and your essence, which is why I got you to sort of check in on what your essence was last week, but also can begin to encompass what you want to create and share. So we're going to use our sort of case study of this Ashtanga teacher, right? Who's maybe is now teaching a bit of rocket yoga. This Ashtanga teacher, what are he or she's core values? So they're very focused on, they love teaching arm balances and inversions and quite a dynamic practice. Okay, so one of their core values might be around strength and power, right? Now, this is not just physical strength and power. They are communicating this through everything they do. So it might be mental resilience and strength. It might be helping people find their power as well, right? That feeds into their teachings. That might be one of their core values. Another one of their core values might be helping students to advance their practice, for example. Maybe they want to help students do things they didn't think they could do. Maybe they want to help students anatomically break things down. So maybe science-based is one of their values. They really love helping students break down those new poses. They've currently got strength power as one, and they've got anatomy-based or science-based teaching that they really, really love. 2 core values. Now, other values they might have, one of their values might be, how do I put that into words? Like being really hands-on, like being really supportive, really keeping people safe, right? So one of their core values might be, I would like to put that into one word. Let's say a hands-on approach is one of their core values, right? So yes, we've got power and strength, we've got science-based, we've got hands-on, and really helpful. We've got 3 core values there. And then say one of their other ones is community, for example. That's an easy one because they like bringing together big communities. Does this make sense? Do you already see how this creates the picture of this teacher? Can you imagine them in your head already? You're like, yeah, I can think of that teacher now. I can see how those core values really, really fit in. Now, this is what we want to create for you as well. And it's not about creating something that you don't already do. I want this to really come from what you already do. So with that being said, I can share my core values with you, and hopefully then you're going to be able to see, okay, this really makes sense here. So my core values, one of them is intuition, right? Intuition and soul is a big core value. I love helping students connect with their intuition. I love working with soul work. Everything I do is around the soul, right? Another one of my intuitions, one of my values is fluidity and flow. And not just in my classes. I want to help people move through ebbs and flows. I want a business that flows and everything works together, but also one that can move through ebbs and flows as well, right? That's one of my core values. I also want to create that in myself, ups and downs, ebbs and flows. I want to be able to move through this within my business. Another one of my values is femininity, yin. You can put it, they both mean the same thing. This has to be a core value because it's something I'm so good at. I don't have a choice, really. It would be a choice anyway, but I'm so good at this, it has to be there. It comes so naturally. I do it anyway. You can see it in my branding, you can see it in my brand, you can see it in my classes, right? Make it a core value, play up on it rather than trying to play down on it. Make it something that is so unique and so much a part of my classes, right? My last one is community. I love building communities, and I love building communities not only of students but of teachers. That's why I'm here with you, right? I love creating a practice that, with the intuition and soul, is taking people's practice deeper than just the physical. And you can see that in my core values. Hopefully none of these were a shock to you. You're like, yeah, that makes sense. We can see each of them play in her teaching. We can probably see each of them play out in my brand as well. And I know a lot of people for this course find me on YouTube. Think about the things that are shared on YouTube. YouTube is one of my main forms of marketing. There's femininity, there's community through vlogs, there is feminine flows, there is classes that really embody my teaching style. They all work with my core values. Everything starts from these core values. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay, let's begin to think about your core values then. Now we're going to start with some of those words you managed to come up with last week, and we don't have to share these just yet. We'll share them more towards the end, and these can also change. You might settle on 4 today, and then you're like, you know what? That doesn't quite fit. And I've changed these, done a big change on these at least once throughout my career. So also know that your core values now, they might shift a little bit and change a little bit as you get to know yourself a little bit more as a teacher. Absolutely fine. We just need a place to start, right? So think about those sort of words that described your essence. Think about when we did that moment in meditation last week, what teacher you saw. How are you describing that teacher? What core values would that teacher you know you can be have? Have a little jot down. You might want to put them in like a mind map. Or the way I usually format it is like in 4 sections on a page. So I'll put one here, write a little blurb, one here, write a little blurb, and do 4 on a page, but that's just how I like to set it out. But I really suggest you write down the reasoning so you don't forget, because you will forget these. Eventually they're going to become so second nature, you have to think about them and remind yourself, oh yeah, those are my core values. If you need help, shout and we can talk through it. This is what I'm really loving about having a slightly smaller group this time around, is I can literally give you one-to-one help whilst we're on here. So if you need it, use it, okay? I'm also happy to shout out a few examples as well. So think of, for example, one of your core values might be accessibility. You want to make yoga really accessible, whether that be financially or whether that be to people with injuries or disabilities. You may want to make it very science-based. You may want to make it really philosophical. Maybe you are a really philosophical teacher. And I mean in like a really deeply yogic way, because I'm quite philosophical, but I do it very much on the guise of intuition and soul. Maybe you really love the philosophy. Maybe you love mindfulness and that's the way you love to teach. You want to bring mindfulness into your brand. That could be a really, really good one. I'm trying to think of some of my favorite teachers that do this really, really well. Hannah does know some of them, so some of these will ring a bell. Humbleness, right? That's Nitai through and through. Humble. He's very yogic. He's very, God, I do miss him. Very yogic, very, very.
He misses you, I'm sure.
This was the teacher I used to practice with in Dubai, and we're missing each other, bless him. He used to see me every week, but because he had aced these core values, his core values were humble. He was really wanting to deepen people's practice, but he was full philosophy, which I loved. It spoke to me, but it didn't speak to everyone, right? Other teachers might have what else? Hands-on, personalized approach. You could have strong, powerful. There's some integrity could be a big one. I'm trying to think of some of the more, not the more masculine ones, but the slightly more masculine ones, just in case you want to pull any of those in. So it could be honesty, it could be care, it could be discipline. You could also begin to bring in some yoga philosophy in terms of the yamas and niyamas. Maybe one of your core values is ahimsa, non-violence and self-love. Maybe one of your core values is being a trauma-informed practitioner. right? And that's something that's really important to you, is being a really safe space to people who have moved through trauma, right? And that might be really important. Maybe one for you is, for example, if you want to work with athletes, maybe one for you is accessibility, but in a different way, like making yoga work for you, right? A specific approach, a specialized approach, a athlete approach, or something like that. Maybe you really want to work with women. Maybe women are, or feminine energy, or kind of women's health and hormone health and regulation is a big part of what you want to do. So we're aiming for 4. I might be throwing out too many ideas and sending. Yeah, you want too many on there. Stick to 4 absolute max. Otherwise, you're going to be too busy. Any questions, just shout.
I'm not sure if this is going to be helpful at all, but I think there's a couple of things. The first thing is, I think you probably relate to this, is any, and maybe, I don't know the girls very well yet, but I think we're probably really more attracted to your energy because that's the energy that we're seeking as well. So
Always,
I'm gonna guess that we're all gonna be more connected to that yin side and not
usually.
very, powerful Ashtanga. I'm guessing.
Usually
And
there's
the other,
one that's always the same inside of everyone's core values. Usually there's at least one that they're like, yeah, I love that. But that's, it works. You can see it then working. It's like seeing it in practice and how you ended up here. It's all core values. But
Mhm.
yes, continue.
Yeah, and I don't know, but like for me, because I'm, been practicing for a little while, but not really teaching, but it's really hard. I'm finding it really hard. All the things that you're saying, you can see that it's almost like you need a little bit of everything. And I'm finding it really hard because I think I'm still discovering, right? It's still like, oh, what are they gonna be? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it absolutely makes sense. So what I would suggest is just start with a few, and these are rough. These can change throughout the 10 weeks. These can change even after the 10 weeks. These can change. I would start with the ones you're sure of, and then maybe just jot down some words that you're like, yeah, these are really, really important. And these are really big ones. One thing I would also say, the more teaching practice you can get, the better, not out of anything other
Mhm,
than to help you get clear on these. So if you just
mhm,
practice teaching people at home, this is going to be really, really great. Any way of practice teaching is going to be really, really amazing, because not even in the sense of you building your yoga business or anything like that, but just helping you really anchor in on these core values. So maybe you have 5 or 6 written down and you're like, I'm gonna bring these down a little bit. I'm gonna decide on what these are a little bit closer. But you can then
mhm,
use that as your intention when you're beginning to teach family members, for example, or friends over Zoom. You can use this and almost play around with it. And this is what it is, right? If for the next 10 weeks you're playing around and figuring out your style with the eventual aim of really anchoring those core values, great. And I also think as we move on to the next things as well, they're going to become clearer too. Because you're going to realize immediately, like, that doesn't quite fit. And even so, I've told you my core values, but if you go on to Soul Shatter and do a power flow, it's tough. It's not an easy class, right? Like, it's
mhm,
really
mhm.
powerful. It's really, really strong. I still have that. I still love that. It's not
Of course.
expressed as part of my core values necessarily, but it's still, my style of teaching is still there. I teach a power class, still very in alignment with my core values. Does that make sense? So it doesn't
Yeah.
necessarily need to limit you. This isn't created to limit you. This is created for you to find yourself in the world of yoga. So you can put this
Mhm.
into everything that you do. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
Any other
Thank you.
questions? Are we feeling okay? Are we feeling like we've got maybe like a rough idea? Yeah. These can change. I'm not going to hold you to them. Don't worry. Now that we have a bit of an idea of what we might like our core values to be, well, we can begin to paint this picture of, yeah, this is the kind of teacher, this is also the kind of business that I can see myself being as well, right? The kind of community I can see myself building, the core values of my brand that I'm building. Now is where the teaching audit comes in, right? And this is, we're going to do this in two ways. We can look at, for those of you who are already teaching a little bit, does this currently match my teaching style? For those of you who are at the beginnings of your teaching, what do these core values now look like when I start teaching? What can I begin to put into place in my teaching? Again, this is going to build so much confidence because you're like, yeah, instead of worrying about the poses, I'm worrying about my core values and seeing how they fit into my teaching style now. So first things first is, does the way I'm currently teaching match my core values? Now, the example I usually give of this is, think back to my core values, right? My core values were, one of the big ones is intuition and like soul work. I really, really want to help my students connect to their intuition on their mat, right? I really want them to actually take the practice deeper and kind of get away from moving just in the body. I want them to embody the practice deeper. Now, what that means, and some of you have been in in-person classes, some of you haven't been. What that means is that in my in-person classes, you see far less adjustments from me than you would from another teacher. It's not because I don't want to adjust you. It's not because I don't do adjustments. It's because I want you to connect to your intuition. So me adjusting your hands in Warrior 2 is just putting you back in the body. It actually goes against my core values for me to be constantly fiddling around with your alignment in a class. Now, it doesn't mean I don't adjust. I absolutely will come and give you a little adjustment in downward facing dog. But when you are mid-flow, you're very unlikely to see me coming and touching you. I will offer verbal adjustments instead to keep you still very much in your own practice. I don't want to break the flow. I don't want to break this ability for you to connect with your intuition. That's a real teaching audit moment there. Because yeah, I could adjust a lot more. And also, this is where it kind of is teacher development beyond your yoga teacher training. And I know this because I've taught them, is obviously in your yoga teacher training, we're like, practice your adjustments, practice this, practice this, practice this. Okay, now that you can do all of these things, see how that fits into your way of teaching. Some teachers' brand is really, really hands-on adjustments. Some teachers don't adjust at all. There's no right or wrong here, right? But we want it to fit into those core values. Another thing might be, for example, if you are wanting to be a really trauma-informed teacher, is your style of teaching trauma-informed, right? Are you making sure that you're creating a safe space? Are you always asking for injuries? Are you avoiding triggering language? Are you making sure that kind of everything that you say or everything you do in the space is very trauma informed, right? Because that's one of your, obviously to an extent, we're all trauma informed, but there are some teachers that really specialize in people going through grief or people going through certain trauma events. And that could be as simple as, again, hands-on adjustments come up in this. So a lot of trauma informed teachers will say, always ask for adjustments, no adjustments in Shavasana, because we want to make sure everyone's feeling really, really safe. Because if they've been through something, someone touching them in the dark is quite traumatic, right? Or someone invading their space can be quite traumatic. Whereas for the hands-on teacher, it's completely different because their core values are different. Neither is right or wrong, right? Other ways you might see your core values come through in your teaching. So say one of your core values is, give me an example, actually. Let me do one of yours. Just give me one. Go on then.
One of mine is self-compassion.
Love that. Okay, so think about how that's coming through then in your teaching. Are you going to be the teacher who is encouraging people to push for one more chaturanga, or are you going to be the teacher going, take a child's pose, right? That could change the way you structure your classes as well. That could be, instead of doing that traditional peak pose, not peak pose, sorry, that peak arc structure of like intensity, 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 and then down, yours might be a bit more like this, because there's optional child's poses at any point in your class, and there's moments where it's challenging, then we take a child's pose. There's moments where it's really challenging, then we're coming down to self-compassion again, right? So again, looking at your teaching and seeing, are there moments where I don't necessarily communicate that as eloquently as I could in the sense of what I'm asking my students to do? Does that make sense? You probably already are, but just thinking about it that way. Now, also look at, what do the core values look like eventually when you're teaching? So say one of your core values is accessibility for injuries, right? What do I need to put into place to make sure that my teaching is going to look like that? I need lots of props around right? Anywhere that I teach, I need access to lots of props. Maybe I need chairs, and I need to use these as well. So maybe when students come into the class, there's already the props laid out, and I'm showing them exactly how they use them. Maybe this looks like in your teaching, immediately I know I'm not the traditional vinyasa teacher. I know that I'm walking around to every single person and really helping and supporting them into exactly where they need to be. My classes ideally might be a little bit smaller so that I can do that with everyone, right? And immediately also thinking about what classes where would I not be able to do that in? If I had a class of 20 all with different injuries, would I be able to give the approach that I want to give? No, not really. So what does that then mean of how I want to structure my classes? Maybe there's a limit of 8, or maybe there's a limit of I want to do small private classes. This does help us with our offerings later on. This is why it's the anchor of everything that we do. Maybe your style and your values suit more small groups and they do big group classes. Does this make sense? Yeah. Anyone else have core values that they want to ask questions on and help seeing how they fit into teaching or auditing that bit of teaching? Yes.
I had mine. It's like the main one that then it branches out, which is connection.
Love
So
it.
like you were saying, so connection to ourselves, connection to the intuition,
Mhm.
connection to the others,
Yeah.
connection to getting deeper into your practice.
Love
It kind
that.
of started a
Yeah.
web.
So that's like your main core value. I
That's
love that.
beautiful. I hadn't even thought about
It's a
that
really
one.
good one, isn't
Really
it? It's
nice one.
great.
Yeah.
So with that, what I want you to think about is how can you help create connection between students, right? Now, one of my, I'm going to give you my complete cheat sheet way to do this, which I love doing, is getting people together, right? And the way that I do this is with oracle cards or affirmation cards. Very suits my style. It's always a oracle card for me because it brings the soul in. For you, it might be an affirmation card if you want to keep it more, less sort of airy fairy and intuition and soul based. Having those cards at the end of classes, everyone comes around and is reading their cards together. That's a really easy way to do it. You may also, for example, if you want to create connection, if you are hosting a class, and this can be harder to do in studio. I think next week we actually speak about, or maybe it's the week after, we speak about all the different ways to make money as yoga teachers and how we structure classes and what classes you teach. For you, for example, connection, you might want to do a yoga and coffee, right? And afterwards,
I was
everyone
gonna.
stays for coffee, right? Because they're connecting.
I did tea. I did that.
Yes,
So,
exactly
but
this. So,
afterwards, everyone got to chat because it was like
yeah,
their first yoga class, and I
yeah,
made
I love
tea.
that.
I was like, I don't know if anyone's gonna stay for tea, and then everyone was having tea
Yeah.
and like talking to each other. So I was gonna ask you if you think it's a
Yes,
good idea.
absolutely. Anything you can do. And again, this is what sets you apart from the teacher who connection isn't one of their core values, right? But immediately you've
Mhm,
created not just connection to themselves, but connection to each other, also connection to you
mhm,
as well. So thinking
mhm,
about even just the small touches that you do that kind of just sprinkle your core values into the way that you teach. Yeah. Anyone else have ones
mhm.
they want me to help with or ideas that they want to run by? Anything? Yes, go.
One of mine is soul retrieval. So, kind of like the idea we're not broken, we're whole as we are, retrieving kind
Mhm.
of parts that we've maybe rejected.
Yeah.
Uh, so, yeah, I guess how to bring that kind of into it.
I think one thing that's going to be really helpful for you, immediately ideas coming, affirmations being used in your class. I am whole. You can use that in a child's pose in the middle of class. Immediately, your style's a little bit different because you're helping them change their verbal dialogue and their internal dialogue to create this feeling of wholeness, right? Something beautiful that you could do that could really bring that into your brand is yoga and journaling, right? And we are going to speak about complementary modalities at some point as well. But can you immediately see where you go from yoga teacher to brand?
Yeah,
Right?
that makes
Your
sense.
brand is journaling mindfulness. Yours is connection and social events. We've got self-compassion and self-love. And I know that you love the astrology as well. So I'm sure that's gone in there as well somewhere, Hannah. But immediately you're thinking where to put it. It'll come in there somewhere. But this is where we immediately start to, and this is why I made this a little bit more about branding as a teacher, because immediately can you see how much more fun it gets to be when instead of just who am I as a yoga teacher, who am I as a brand? Because yoga is fantastic. Yoga is amazing, but yoga is so much more impactful when we have a theme around it and when we can use other tools to complement it, if that makes sense, right? Because yoga is not just what we're doing on the mat. You're doing yoga when you're journaling. You're doing yoga when you're sitting and having a tea with like-minded people. You're doing yoga when you are doing affirmations, or even when you're, for example, sharing your astrology. That's still yoga. Like this yogic astrology, like it's all still yoga, but we have such this, the modern way of teaching is so strict on it needs to be on a mat, movement based. You're limiting your business, you're limiting your brand, right? And that's also just not what people want. Yes, they want it, but there are so many teachers doing it. There's so many ways to find it. We're losing the world of yoga that we can tap into to not only make ourselves different, but also create variety in what we do. Does that make sense? Does this feel good? Do you feel like you can really see where some of your core values fit into your teaching and things that would really suit your teaching? Yeah? Great. Okay, we look happy. That is good. Now, our sort of ongoing steps from here is beginning to create a brand as a teacher. Now, this is where I'm going to talk through some limiting beliefs with you guys, because my biggest, maybe not the biggest, but I know that one of the biggest sort of barriers to new teachers is they are really hesitant to calling themselves a business. They are very hesitant to calling themselves a brand, right? I'm just a freelancer teacher, right? That's what they want to be. I just want to be a freelancer. I just want to be a freelancer teacher. Now, I really, really want you to shift into thinking of yourself as a business, because that is what you are. And all you're doing by, I'm a freelancer teacher, is actually diminishing everything that you do. You do invoicing, you do marketing, you do class planning, you do playlist creation. You are a business. You are not just a freelancer, right? And the mindset of a freelancer is very much looking for work elsewhere. Whereas the mindset of a business is creating something that is yours. And there is nothing more that I want for you guys. And to be honest, that's probably I have no regrets over the way that I did anything, but I wish I had prioritized my own brand and business earlier in my journey as a teacher, because the sooner you do it, the more you have to build, right? This doesn't mean you can't do both, but I really want you to shift it. And it's interesting, I saw a post literally yesterday about a teacher also speaking about this, that it took her 8 years to realize that the career she wanted as a yoga teacher was not actually freelancing constantly in studios. It was being able to work for herself. It took her 8 years to realize that's what she wanted and to make that change. And what I want for you guys is to already be working on that. So that, yeah, maybe you have a 50-50 split to begin with, and 50% you're doing things for gyms or in studios or hotels or whatever it might be, but 50% is yours, like your yoga and journaling evening, or like your yoga and tea mornings and things like this, like your astrology and yoga evenings, for example. These are things that actually you can have ownership of, and I cannot stress enough how valuable ownership is. And I know at this stage in your journey, it feels very safe. For example, it feels very safe for you to maybe do a workshop in collaboration with a yoga studio instead of doing it on your own. Nothing wrong with that. I actually encourage you to take any opportunities that come your way. But know that in, for example, a year down the line or eventually down the line, the aim is to actually have full ownership over that workshop, right? Maybe you're renting the space. Maybe you found a space, and actually instead of having to split that money with a studio, it's yours. Also in terms of intellectual property, which is basically just all the magic you're sharing in a class, you want that to fully be yours. And when you are working with other people, when you're working with studios, when you're working with other businesses, there's then that sort of overlap there. And the reason I want you to think of a business is because you have everything that a business has. Just because you don't have a brick and mortar space, you have everything that a business has. And I want you to give yourself the respect you deserve. Does that make sense? So if you do have a little bit of resistance around this word, I really want you just to soften to it to begin with and be like, okay, maybe I could be a business. Maybe, and if you have a really big resistance, I am building a business. Not building a freelancing career. I am not building a self-employed career. I am building a business, right? business, 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 and a brand, because these are things that can continue to grow. You can do anything with it. Whereas building your job as a freelancer, if you were to, for example, move country, you have nothing to take with you. And that's not sustainability, right? If I, for example, because I moved recently from Dubai to the UK, if I didn't have Soul Shower, I wouldn't have had anything to take with me. Everything else was in person, right? I obviously had the mentorship and I had other things online. I did tarot readings and things like that. But if I had never taken full ownership of anything within my work and had always freelanced, what that then would have meant is I would have been reliant on other people for my work. It then meant there's less flexibility. It means that if I want to travel, it's much harder. It means that if I want to move, it's a little bit more scary. So this is probably the reason you want to be a yoga teacher, right? Is flexibility and being able to have a bit more ownership. So we must remember this at this stage. Does that make sense? Hopefully that's helped you to just begin to shift this mindset. And I know that word feels a little bit scary to begin with, because you're like, imposter syndrome, who am I to say that? It's more than valid for you to say that. You are a business. You might be a one-woman business at this stage, but it is what you're creating. And that is why the brand we're creating is so important, because it's yours. It's no one else's, right? So your ongoing steps are begin to think about the brand that you are creating for yourself as a teacher, and know that the more we begin to hone in on this, and this takes time, this isn't something that happens overnight, but the more we begin to hone in on this and the more we begin to really stand in this, it also helps to create consistency with your students. They're going to trust you more. So you know that point at the beginning where I was like, your students need to trust you, your students need to know what they're expecting. This is how we do it. Okay. And this is why it's coming at this point within the mentorship, is because it's going to affect everything. So I guess your homework, not just for this week, for the next couple of weeks, for even the duration of this mentorship till up until the end, is to begin to think of branding that reflects your core values. Pinterest is great for this. I want you to think of colors. I want you to think of fonts. Now, all of these things help you feel a certain way. Red, bold font, how does that make you feel? Strong. Like, right? Whereas other colors, for example, I can give you the example because this is something I am very particular on. I guarantee you that there will be people who have never met me, but through the things that I share within my marketing, they feel as if they have, down to the colors that I wear when I'm teaching. I am another level on this. You do not have to be this level. I always say that. You do not have to be as particular about this as I am. I love the branding side of things, so I am very particular on it. It may just be something that you tick off, but down to the colors that I share on social media is a big form of my marketing. So the colors that I share, the fonts that I share, right? I'm currently redoing my website. That's all changing. The colors, they're not changing too much. They're just adjusting, realigning, but through the fonts, through the colors, through the things that, for example, I wear. So for me, this was a big one. This was a teaching audit that I did a few years ago. Was one of my values was intuition and connection to the soul. Now, this is really basic, but it was one that really made a difference. Through me wearing, for example, a bright orange activewear set, was that helpful to my students connecting to their soul, or was it just distracting? Probably just distracting, especially when after class I'd have people come and be like, where's your outfit from? I'd be like, that's lovely, but were you focusing on the yoga class, right? It also didn't fit into my core values of femininity and fluidity, right? So I almost had a uniform of things I wore to teach yoga. I still do, and they're colors I love, so it makes it really easy. I'm not saying you have to change the things that you love. Whereas the teacher who is really enthusiastic and playful and joyful, maybe you're encouraging joyful movement, maybe that's you as a teacher. Immediately we see how their brand might be. And I had this with one of the teachers on the previous yoga teacher mentorship. Hers was all about making health and wellness and yoga fun. Her branding is all pink and purple, and it is so like girly pops, and I just love it. It's lovely, right? And it really fits what she shares, and it fits her personality, it fits her way of teaching, right? So really think about, okay, well, what colors communicate this? And you can also look at if you Google like the feelings of certain colors, like blue is usually quite peaceful. It's quite often associated with the ocean. It's associated with serenity, right? Green is very earthy, greens and browns and yeah, very earthy, very grounded, very solid and stable. Reds and oranges are quite activating. They're quite maybe motivating, quite powerful colors. Yellow's a very happy color. We know this, right? Think about the way people feel when they look at your marketing at the end of the day. Social media will end up being, for a lot of you, I assume, your marketing. So in everything that you do, thinking about, okay, what colors do this? Again, we need to narrow this down to like 4 or 5 colors. You can go on Pinterest and just look up color palette for this, green color palette, red color palette, pastel color palette. This should be fun, right? I don't want you to stress about it. Make it fun. Make a Pinterest board all around the things that you like. You don't necessarily need to decide on it just yet, but it's going to help you to begin to really see, okay, this is the brand. And then from here, everything I share going forwards is also going to be in alignment from this. Another helpful thing for you to think about here is think about your ideal student. And we are going to talk about soul students, spend a whole week on them, but you already might have a bit of an idea just based on these core values, who your favorite people to teach are, who your favorite ideal students are. What do they want to see, right? What do they want to see? Because from there, you are also going to know. So usually I find that this is very, very organic. I don't think I've found with anyone yet that they're different, that they want something different than their soul students want or than their ideal student wants. But just have a little think, okay, my ideal student is this. What do they want to see? What do they need to see, right? Does that make sense? Yeah, so things you're looking at is any colors that you like, and this will then come into the fonts that you use as well. I settle on 3 or 4 colors. Fonts, 2. You don't really need more than 2, and this is very relaxed. This isn't strict branding. Any imagery that you like, any imagery that you feel really communicates, Pinterest is the best place for this, but any imagery that really communicates the essence you have as a teacher, whether that be through the setup of a room, for example, how you set up your yoga classes can communicate your core values, right? So for example, maybe you're trying to create connection and you have everyone in a circle for a class or a semicircle, or maybe you have everyone sort of along the walls or whatever it might be, right? Especially if you're doing more of an events class, playing around with the way everyone's set up can be really, really fun. I love putting people in semicircles because then I can make eye contact with every single one of them. They're equal distance away from me. It's great, right? It helps me to create community. It also helps them to see each other rather than just seeing the back of someone, right? So thinking about things like this, you won't be able to do it in every class, but I mean in the classes that are 100% your own, how would you do these things? Anything else I want you to look at? I don't want to make it a really, really big job at this stage. It doesn't need to be done. It's fun. I want you to think of it as something, a creative bit of homework to do, to just begin to think about, what does my brand as a teacher look like, right? Does that make sense? How does that feel? Does that feel okay, or does that feel scary? Okay? A little bit scary? No, it's okay. Great. So what we are doing for your little homework bits is bringing together an idea of what this would look like. It is as simple as you can look up yoga brand in Pinterest and have a little look. But what I want you to think is, does that communicate how I feel? So if you think for mine's a bit more mixed at the moment. They're all coming together eventually. I'm in an in-between stage in my branding at the moment. Let's look at Soul Shadow's branding, because Soul Shadow's branding is really, really clear. You're all on Soul Shadow. Now, I first of all wanted Soul Shadow to feel like very homey. It's wanted to feel like a soul home, right? So you will actually see in Soul Shadow that there's quite a lot of earthy tones in there. There's a warmth, because I like the feeling of it feeling warm and welcoming. So instead of it being like stark whites, for example, it's more creamy. There's more warmth to it. There's a little bit of a green undertone going on in there because I want that earthy feel to it, right? All of the colors are very, very soft because that's my more soft energy. Yeah. My personal brand is very in alignment with that. A little bit different. Soul Shadow is very specifically one part of it because it's welcome home for your soul. Very, very particular. It embodies exactly what I want it to embody, in the sense of it's grounded, it's homey, it's welcoming. It also inspires people to connect a little bit deeper to the soul. It feels safe. right? And you can go and look at, for example, the Soul Shadow Instagram after this and have a little look and see where you can sort of see that in play. My personal branding is slightly different, still the same. There's still the soft colors. It brings in a few more of the feminine colors. There's like a really soft muted pink. There's softer blues every once in a while. The green is still very much there. The creams, the soft light colors. That's a little bit more of my feminine side as a teacher coming through, whereas I wanted Soul Shadow to be slightly more gender neutral, if that makes sense. But because my essence is in there, it will always be very feminine anyway. Can you see where actually bringing the colors in and bringing the fonts and all of the different imagery can begin to create a feel? And this is something that actually I think I will send a screenshot of the Soul Shadow page into the chat now, and you can literally see it as an example, because then I know that, and ask any questions. Where are we? Today. Ah, there you are. Okay, if you have a look now, what you will see is some of the things that are shared within the Soul Shadow branding. Now, Soul Shadow branding, again, very similar to my own. It's an extension of my own. The core of the Soul Shadow branding is the soul. Soul Shadow is a yoga brand, but it's not just a yoga brand. It's about soul work, right? So there's a little bit of energy work in there. There's a little bit of ritual work. There is a little bit more going on, and that's communicated in the branding, right? So you can literally see that now. If you have a look at just the snapshot, you can see, oh, there's a mixture of things here, but they all communicate the one thing. Yeah. Any questions on this before you go? No? Do we feel okay with core values? Yes? Happy, inspired? Want you to feel inspired. I want you to feel like you've got like a fun thing to sort of figure out. I don't need the final now. Okay, great. So we feel inspired, we feel happy. All I need you to do then for this week is play around with those core values. Your sort of longer term homework is to, if you're not already teaching, gently start teaching family, right? I don't need you to necessarily start teaching other people if that feels scary at the moment, because we can create a plan for that together. But I want you to start teaching people close to you, maybe teaching online with people, whatever it might be. Start teaching and start putting your core values into your teaching. Okay, maybe you do like a practice journaling and yoga with someone and practice on them. Okay, maybe you do another yoga and tea with a friend. Okay, I want you to just begin to practice putting these things in place, see what feels good, see what maybe doesn't feel so good. It's also going to really help you to build on your core values and narrow them down. Also, if you need to narrow down your core values, just begin to see which ones. It doesn't mean that they're not important to you. It just means that they're not something you feel you need to communicate to others, right? So for example, one for me is I'm actually a really trauma-informed teacher. I always will be, always am. I don't feel the need to put it in my branding because I'm not actually calling in students who are dealing with a lot of trauma. That's not who I'm trying to call in. But if I had someone walk into a class, and to be honest, in every class, you'll never hear me speaking about like the body in any kind of way that's going to stress people out. You're never going to see me adjusting people without permission. It's something that's already there, but I haven't put it as one of my big core values. It might be a lesser value that someone asks me, are you trauma informed? Yeah, I am. But it's not something that I feel the need to, whereas some of you will want to put it as one of your big core values. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay, enjoy your week. What I would like you to do is towards the end of this week, ideally before our next session, is share a rough idea of your core values in the chat. If you have created a Pinterest board, send us a link just so we can have a look. I also really love this because it helps you to see how different your brands are also going to be as well. You're really like, wow, I can really see her essence as a teacher so clearly now. Eventually, so towards the end of this course on week 10, we do your little business plans as well. So it's going to be really nice to see this stage, and then this is all going to come into your business plans at the end. Okay, happy? Any questions? You're very, very welcome. Enjoy your week. Have fun creating this. Be creative. And I will see you same time next week.
Amazing.
Thanks so
Thank
much.
you.
See you later, guys. Well done. Any questions, please message. I'm here. Keep it quiet. I don't mind you being quiet, but if you do have questions, please use me. Okay, I'm more than happy to. I will always respond as soon as I see it. See you
Thank
later,
you.
guys.
Thank you.
Bye.